Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. We've been looking at the Beatitudes, and we come to the completion of the Christian Manifesto. Matthew 5, verse 10. Our Lord speaks to us and says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I must start today by taking you back to the beginning of our series and the Communist Manifesto. In that document, which has transformed political dialogue for the past century and a half, the writers say that they have discovered a pattern in the behavior of groups and people and nations. And as one group rises to the top, they begin to oppress another group. The elite and the masses live in a dance of sorts. The elite exert power to control the masses, and then finally the larger group realizes that though they may not possess economic power or political power, they do have the power of the people. And like a colony of ants that swarm against a much larger foe, they conquer because of the overwhelming force, marshaled in a single calling and a single direction. The greatest difficulty of this system, according to the writers of the Communist Manifesto, is that it repeats itself over and over again through history. And once the masses have arisen, even in a fight for equality and justice, someone or some leadership elite takes charge, and then they become the small group with power. Soon the oppressed have become the oppressors, and eventually they will become the target for another wave of revolution. But communism claims to have the cure: equality for all. But rarely, in fact never, has this system ever worked as the theories proposed. And the reason is very simple. Human nature, fallen nature, our sin nature, leads us to take power and then use power against anyone who would try and take it away from us. What has usually happened is that wealth is taken from the successful and distributed to others until finally the resources are drained and no one finds any advantage in hard work or dignified labor. Why should she work so hard if no one else is forced to work? Why should he labor and toil for the benefit of those who will not work? And when the reward for labor is taken away, most individuals cease to labor. Ultimately, communism leads away from shared wealth and toward an increase in shared scarcity. We can see it in the examples that have been for the world in the last 100 years. Except, of course, for the chosen few. Those who are the New Order leaders now build their own mansions and their summer homes and their lavish lifestyles. And they too will find an end for their power. And it may be true that history is replete with wave after wave of revolution, yet the cause might be understood. For most, it is economic. Most theories believe that. But you see, when God is removed from the picture, money is the god of this world. When sin is taken out of the equation in the human nature, when our selfish desires and our sinful thoughts are not confronted as the true cause of envy and strife. And when a real solution, a permanent solution, a spiritual solution is lacking, we'll never find the happy life that we were supposed to come to. God's perfect will on earth will not come to pass, at least not until He determines that the time has arrived and everything must be renewed, reformed, remade. But the Christian Manifesto is different. There's nothing in any of the Beatitudes that call us to arise and overtake our oppressors. In fact, it tells us quite the opposite. It does not pit person against person. It does not call for uprising or for protest. It does not concern itself with the minor inconveniences of culture or even economic status. Instead, the Christian Manifesto sets our sights on a higher purpose, a greater reward, on delayed gratification, on self-control, and even on suffering for doing what's right. Jesus said, "Blessed are you when you are persecuted because of righteousness." That word that has been translated persecuted is, according to the dictionary, a prolonged and causative form of the verb to flee. It means to be persecuted is to be chased. To be persecuted is to run from the persecution. When a person is persecuted, someone is after them. Someone is coming for them. They are made to run. They are put to flight. They are driven away from the pain and the intolerance. Now we must understand that it does not mean that we flee from righteousness. We're pursuing righteousness. We're persecuted because of righteousness. But we are pressed on every side, and our only hope, our only aim is to escape from the pressure to unrighteousness so that we may continue to pursue righteousness, running toward and to accomplish the goal that is set before us. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 23, Jesus spoke to His disciples about the persecution that was coming. And He says, when they persecute you, or when they chase you in this city, flee. Run to the next city. Seek safety somewhere else. Jesus fully intended that the battles fought by His followers would not be won with spears or knives or swords. They would not be fought with bullets or bombs. Our battles would be fought in the spirit realm. That's what Paul reminds us of. Our victories would be won with the miraculous intervention of God. And when we hold fast to the faith, even as we are being chased and fleeing, that God would open locked doors. That He would blind the inspecting eyes. That He would grant us remarkable favor. And we would see the increase in the kingdom because of our strong grip on righteousness, even as we turn loose of this world. When we hold fast to the one thing which has the power to save us, we will become a shining light for those around us who have nothing firm. When we depend on our economic stability to hold us, the markets will be shaken. When we have nothing secure, nothing anchored in truth, our lives become meaningless. May God help us to run. But not only to run away from the pressure and the authorities who might seek to harm us, but also to allow that we should run to and press on toward His goodness, His faithfulness, and His holy character. The Christian Manifesto does not cause us to rise up in civil unrest. Rather, it teaches us to hold fast to God's character even when we are pursued for doing what is holy. When Jesus sent out his disciples, even before he had been crucified, when he sent them out, the 70, he sent out 2 by 2. He told them that there would be places where they would be welcomed and places where they would be scorned. Where they were not welcomed, he said to them, "Shake the dust off of your feet and move on." The first disciples understood that some would receive their words and some would be apathetic and others would be hostile. They were prepared to see many souls enter the kingdom, and they were prepared for many to ignore them. They were prepared for some to arouse suspicion and anger, and for some to directly oppose their efforts. In Acts chapter 13, when Paul goes into the city of Antioch, they were excited, Paul and Barnabas were excited to tell their story of Jesus to a new group of people, someone who had never heard before. And at first, their message was well received by the Jews and by the Gentiles. But then the Jews became jealous, because the Gentiles had received the message with such enthusiasm. The Jews aroused a great disturbance, and they began to persecute Paul and Barnabas. And when the persecution became too intense, they were shown the highway. They were kicked out of town. Luke writes to us and says, they shook the dust off of their feet, and they simply moved on to the next city. If you and I are to understand what's happening in our contemporary culture, our culture is progressing along the playbook of the communist ideology. There are a number of people, a number of organizations who are stirring up what we might call the underclass, the downtrodden, the forgotten, the idle, not the fake God, but those who are just not working very hard. And they're challenging producers against the authorities, against those who are thought to be powerful. And they're coming from multiple directions, and you understand, if you've seen the news, they're coming guns a-blazing. And although I mean it figuratively, it will not be long before it will be quite literal. This week in Dallas, it became literal. One man whose anger had been aroused to such a height and extent took up arms against the powerful and the authorities. Forces are at work to undermine the fabric and the peacefulness of our nation. And this is not simply a necessary march which must happen, but rather it is that there are those individuals, those organizations who are fanning the flames of this uprising. It is planned and it is purposeful. And there are a lot of things, a lot of targets at which to aim. Race relations is an easy target for our nation. We do not always have the best track record. We must admit that. And so it's easy to stoke the fires of rage. Even though we've made great progress, it's still easy to stoke the fires. Class envy is a second gun that is pointing at our culture. The American dream, we're told, is being taken away from us by the evil capitalists. Never mind the fact that those evil capitalists are the ones who give us jobs and help us accomplish the American dream. Gender identity is just the latest weapon formed against our traditional culture, but it's working. All of this is breeding contempt and anger, and it is stirring up violence on every side of the powerful, those who are in leadership. I believe that these are simply tools that are being used to rip apart the foundation of our civil society and to begin the revolution here. And it is working like never before. The interesting thing, I think, about these movements is that they are well funded. Though they claim they have been excluded from success because of some organized discrimination, they've actually been able to amass large sums of money and organize great campaigns for equality and for the recognition of diversity. And each of these movements is fueling the fires, and each movement plays on the hearts and the minds of those who have believed they've been treated unfairly. But there is a pocket of money, a large pocket of money, pressing the issue. All of it is appealing because the basest part of our humanity is envy. It is rage. It encourages conflict, violence. It pits one person against another. It pits groups of people against the very foundation of our culture, against the very forces that allow them to have a voice in our civil society. And they are targeting the church. Some people say, well, why is the church being targeted? You know, the church has no political power, but the church must be targeted. The church for too long has been able to proclaim the truth. For too long we've been able to practice righteousness unabated. For too long we've been able to free the enslaved, to help the poor, to feed the hungry, to heal the sick, to tell people the truth, to tell people that their lifestyles are sinful, to warn them about the coming judgment. For too long, as well, some who claim the name of Jesus have been acting like the devil. People no longer desire to hear that they are a product of their own choices. People no longer want to know that their lifestyles are evil and that will bring judgment. People no longer want to be told what to do or how to live. And our culture no longer seeks God. And so the church must become a target. The church, additionally, has been identified with the power that is fading away. Listen, even today, 50% of Americans report that they attend church on a regular basis. Half. And yet there are perhaps 100 million Americans, maybe a third or more, who are considered outsiders and have never had any connection or contact with the church in their life. It's up to 45% in the youngest generation. The church has no power of legislation. We don't pass laws. We don't make rules. We don't decide who wears their seatbelts and who don't. The church has no power over the culture. If we did have power over the culture, you would understand that the culture would be moving in a different direction than it is. And yet the church does have power over the hearts and minds of individuals. One person at a time. When we submit our lives to Jesus, when we surrender to His power, when we give Him control of our hearts and our minds, we allow His opinion to become our opinion. We agree with every other true believer on what is good and right and holy. And we're a threat. Not because we hold the power of the purse or the power of the legislative branch, but because the powers in the heavenly realms don't like us. They're repeating the playbook of history. They're trying to eradicate the influence of godliness wherever it exists. And though not many people have ever truly lived the life that Jesus has called them to, they are rebelling against it. Fewer and fewer people are even interested in having the breastplate of righteousness as part of their armor. The church is a symbol of the old way, in spite of the fact that the culture is moving further and further from the church each and every day. Say, Pastor, you sound crazy. I may be crazy. Yet if what I've read about cultural shifts in other places is played out in this nation, the church is in for great hardship and persecution. You say, oh, that sounds bad, Pastor. Well, not according to Jesus. According to Jesus, blessed are you when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake. It is virtually impossible to name one revolution that advanced the cause of communism or socialism that did not bring intense persecution upon the church. That's the bad news. Persecution is going to get worse. And at the same time, everywhere that persecution has increased, the church has prospered. In the depth of commitment, in the strength that they need, if we're serious about praying for revival, and I know many of you have been praying for revival for years, but if we're serious about praying for revival, it may be God's purpose and God's plan that revival starts with persecution. So I didn't pray for that. No, you pray for God to have His way and to bring revival. Because revival follows tribulation. If you look at church history, wherever there has been oppression on the people of God, revival has sprung up. This is good news. If persecution is increasing, then it means revival is on the way. The good news goes even further. Jesus says, when you are persecuted because of righteousness, you inherit not the kingdom of this world, not the kingdom of the United States of America. You inherit the kingdom of heaven. And when we get our eyes off of this prize and put our eyes on that prize, we'll really have something. We'll really be able to do something. We'll really be able to accomplish something. We'll really live out the call to righteousness. And so, I warn you today. It may not be next week or next month or even next year. But if our culture continues down the path it's on, persecution is coming. And that means